Hi, my name's Sophie Scott and I'm the Director of the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at University College London. I'm interested in the human brain and human communication and how we communicate with each other and how our brains support that. And I'm particularly interested in our voices, so how I'm doing what I'm doing now and how you are decoding the information from my voice when I'm speaking. I think the only thing that sucks in my job is that there aren't like 2 more days in the week to do it in, because time is always the factor that limits everything. You know, I'm the director of the institute, I'm a working mum, and I'm a scientist, and it's really hard to make the time in the day to make it feel like you've managed all of those things to your satisfaction, and they've all got to be done well, or you know, and it takes time. So I have very little free time in my day. There's not much point in my day when I'm not doing something. So hobbies, I make time to do exercise. I feel better for that. I feel happier and like more clear-headed. And stand-up comedy and the theatre. So I really, really like performing stand-up comedy, and I like watching stand-up comedy. And I like going to the theatre, so when I can make time, that's something I try and make time for. And I'll drop anything to go and do stand-up comedy. I love doing it because again, you only get better at doing that by doing it. But it's kind of it's increased my enjoyment of watching other comedians, actually having some opportunity to do it myself. So that's probably my main hobby is comedy. This next man has a laugh that worries me. I need him to breathe. In. Think when you want him to breathe. Now, I mentioned him in a talk I did, and I said I thought he might be dead, because I was very worried that he was just breathing out too much, and he actually got in touch and told me he's okay. I've never had doubts that I've chosen the right career path because I really love my job. Now, I'm not saying there couldn't be other jobs out there that I would have loved or other things I might even have been good at, but I'm good at this and I like it, and I've seen enough of life to know that that's very, very lucky. The most satisfying part of my job is always looking at data. I love the point I love designing an experiment, I love writing an experiment up, all of the, you know, kind of preparing a talk, making figures, taking it to a journal, all of that's great, but looking at the data, you've run the study, what do the data show us? That is always interesting, it's always absolutely fascinating. I'm doing a project at the moment where I'm trying to get some funding to look at performance. So I'm going to try and look at voices and comedy and humour in the context, both of the person on stage but also the audience, and try and look at that like an interaction. So how does a stand-up comedian coordinate the behaviour of the audience, and how do the audience communicate back to them? Because they don't just sit there passively and then laugh when they're provoked to. It is much more interactive than that. So almost like it's a weird conversation. So that's something I'm doing at the moment. I really look forward to that. I found it very, very interesting. Laughter can be contagious. Adults often find that they're laughing simply because somebody else is laughing, and that's what behavioural contagion is. You just catch the behaviour from somebody. It's not the only behaviour that's contagious. So yawning, coughing, a lot of blinking, those are all examples of behaviours that you can catch from other people. And the really interesting thing is it's primarily still a social behaviour. You're much more likely to catch a yawn or a cough or a laugh from someone you know than someone you don't know. It's as if you're showing your kind of affiliation to them by joining in with something that they're doing. And also we learn to do this. Babies do not laugh contagiously. Babies blink only when they need to blink. We teach babies to do these contagious behaviours. We're not the only animal that shows these contagious behaviours. Dogs will catch a yawn from another dog. Dogs will catch a yawn from another human if they know that human. So it's an affiliative behaviour that almost certainly isn't only found in humans. And although again it seems quite simple, actually it's probably quite complex, this contagion. Are there any mysteries left in this area? There are many mysteries left in this area. I think one of the things we're just starting to understand is how we can start to capture the complexities of the information in speech that's not spoken. We are just starting to learn how we can ask questions about the melody and the intonation of the voice, about the rhythm of the voice, about the accent of the voice, about the way that emotion and affiliation and affection are made clear in the voice. So there's a lot more to understand about that. And something else that we are just starting to grapple with is the fact that it's good to talk to each other. It's not just that we're barking commands or bits of information to each other. We like to talk to each other. We're social animals. And the dominant mode for social interaction for most humans, for most of the time, is talking to each other. And that's good for you. We know that one of the single biggest risk factor for dementia is losing your hearing in adulthood and not using some kind of hearing aid. And that seems to be a problem because it stops you talking. It stops you talking to other people. It stops you having conversations and having a social network. So although it's about speech and language, it's actually, when you look at communication in the brain, you're looking at a really wide-ranging topic that takes us right to the heart of what it means to connect with other humans. How to kickstart a conversation at a party? Well, if I could give you a good answer to that, I would be much richer than I am. But there's a phrase in English that's called breaking the ice. And what we mean by that is having some reason to laugh. And that can be whatever might work in that situation. It might be a reference to some news story, some silly bit of news that's going on, or something everybody's, it's one of the reasons why English people talk about the weather is that the weather changes a lot, so there's always something to talk about. So that's anything that you can think of. It doesn't even have to be very funny, that just would be enough to raise a smile. That will start to make a difference. Here's an example. There is quite good evidence that when humans have a conversation with each other, they can't have a conversation with more than 4 to 5 people at a time. So if you've got 2 people at a party, they can talk. Third person can join, 3 people are talking. 4th person can join, 4 people are talking. 5th person joins, you're right at the edge of this being manageable. 6th person joins, it will split into 2. It may split into 2 when the 5th person joins. And the constraint on this seems to be how you manage the conversation. So that's quite interesting, and it works at parties as people arrive, because you can actually see it play out as people join in and conversations start to split up. It's very hard to maintain a conversation if 10 people are standing in a circle or trying to work out who gets to talk next. Another very interesting example would be that, according to science, you can only have around 10 to 11 close friends. And that seems to be to do with the amount of time you have to spend with people to sort of have them as a friend. So you couldn't have 25 close friends. You couldn't put that amount of time in. And this is all work by a guy called Robin Dunbar, who studies the sorts of numbers of humans and their social interactions. And he also points out, in fact, it gets called Dunbar's number, that when you have a bigger group of people, when you have about 100 people, between 100 and 150 people, that's about the natural size of a unit of people that could possibly all know each other. They might be able to work together. Lots of units of humans kind of break down to this sort of size. And he says if you get bigger than that, then you start to need things like police forces and other ways of managing that situation, because not everybody knows everybody and people start to behave more poorly as a result. So you can see these quite interesting constraints. You can have a conversation with 5 people, no more, well, including you, 4 people and plus you. You can have about 10 to 11 close friends, and you can be part of a unit of around 100 people. If it gets bigger than that, you need some other structure to make sure you all get on. I can't think personally. It's normally just scanning people. I think one of the strangest things I did was we were trying to do a recording with someone who worked in the army. He was a soldier and he was a regimental sergeant major, and his job was to scream commands on the parade so that he could be heard. So if you went to Buckingham Palace and you watched the changing of the guard, there'd be somebody going, "Attention!" and that would be him. And we got him in, and he was very, very good. Just the noise he made was unbelievable. He was just blasting sound at you. This engine for screaming. We were all just like, "I want to do something because this man's telling me what to do." But then we asked him to imagine you're telling someone off, because we wanted the sound of him getting angry. And he was very uncomfortable. He said he didn't want to do it. And it turned out he was really uncomfortable around ladies. I don't want to swear in front of women. And we were like, "Do you know what? We'll be fine. We're quite used to it." So then he just worked. He said, "Well, I'll do what I did yesterday." And he just repeated someone he'd told off the day before. And he'd absolutely torn a strip off this man. And he started with, "Do you think this is acceptable? Do you think this is appropriate?" And he just ended up shrieking this absolute ball of rage. And I was uncontrollably anxious, although he wasn't shouting at me, just to be anywhere near it. So that was very interesting and really, really, really anxiety provoking. I think there's two things I would really, really, really like to find. The first is about laughter. And I would really like to understand what happens when you start to laugh, particularly if you start to laugh really hard, really spontaneously. If you think about the last time you were laughing and you could not stop, that kind of laughter, I want to know what's happening in your brain. And I want to actually know what's happening in your body, because it affects your whole body. We know people get very floppy, very weak when they're laughing hard. How is that? What's actually happening in your brain that's causing that to happen? So I would really like to be able to interrogate and understand just the pathway of events that lead to you starting to laugh like that. I would also really like to understand how we can hear anything. Hearing is so strange, it's such a peculiar sense. It's completely based on physical vibration. So if I make a sound and you hear that sound, the only way for that to be transmitted is through physical movement of stuff, the air molecules vibrating. If you're picking this up by something that's recorded the sound, then the physical things have got to actually, those vibrations have got to be stored in some way, in a digital way, and then played back to you by headphones or loudspeakers that themselves contain moving parts that then vibrate the air, that then vibrate your ear. So you've always got this pattern of vibrations, and then your brain can decode this and pull out all different sorts of information from that in real time. You can't take a photo of a sound. Sounds are only there as long as they're happening, and then they go away. So actually, whatever you do with sounds is not only based on this incredibly transient signal, but you've got to be able to process it immediately and sort of hang on to something that's always gone as soon as it's arrived. So how our brains solve that problem, how our brains actually start to deal with the noises that we make and that we communicate with, I would really, really like to have a better idea of how that happens. I think one of the biggest challenges is always technology. You're always just pushing right at the edges of what it's possible to do. So our brain scanners are great, but they're also irritating that they're quite slow, they're very noisy, and you're always going, "Oh, if only it was a bit quieter, oh, if only it was a bit faster, if only we could have someone move around more." So you're always kind of, but then that's science. I mean, I don't think science works very well if you say, "Well, this is all we'll ever need. I'll be fine here without ever changing anything." I think it's a real problem I'm worried about the future in the UK and how we are going to cope with the pathologically stupid actions we've taken around Brexit, because science is an international phenomena. It doesn't happen in a nation by nation way. The UK has traditionally been very, very good at science, and we've been a world centre for science, and we have benefited from this because scientists from all around the world want to come and work with us. And I am terrified at what we might be doing. That might mean that doesn't happen anymore, because that will hurt science. And if you hurt science, there may be not that many people doing science in the UK, but science is a tremendous engine for technology and design and interactions with the arts. Lots of other good things come out from having good science going on in your country. And I fear it's one of the many examples of things that we've sleepwalked into without the government even considering that it's a problem. So I'm scared about that. I get up in the morning to go out and do some exercise. So I find that if I can get some exercise first thing, then A, it will happen, B, I'll feel much better for the rest of the day. So I get up around 4:45 in the morning and go and move around a bit, move the blood clots around a bit. Yeah. There's a book called The Psychology of Military Incompetence, which was written by a former head of the psychology department at University College London called Norman Dixon. And it is a spectacular book about terrible military decisions and unpacking the psychology and the psychological limitations of the humans concerned that led to them. Sometimes it's just devastating, like the fall of Singapore is heartbreaking, but he really cleverly pulls together some really important lessons, and lessons that I think, we could think well about paying attention to now, that how people in the face of difficult situations will often deal with the things that they can deal with, even if that's not going to stop anything, but they'll interpret everything as being around the thing that they can do because that's what they want to do, that's how they deal with situations. So people's failure to engage with what's really going on, failure to take seriously when they're told by other people that there are problems, perhaps people who are more junior than them, perhaps people who should not be telling them that they're wrong. Well, do you know what? Sometimes it's really useful to listen to people who are telling you that you're wrong. So he was setting out the problem in a military context, but actually you find it working in many different aspects of life. You can find it in any working environment, I suspect, and we've seen it very clearly happening recently in UK politics. Another very good book, if you want a more modern book, a book called Murmur by a writer called Will Eaves. It's a fantastic book, which is a sort of meditation upon the thoughts and the dreams of Alan Turing when he was given, loosely termed therapy. He was basically chemically castrated, having been found to be having homosexual relationships at a time when they were illegal. And it's a fantastic book. It kind of fictionalizes Alan Turing. He has another, the man in the story has another name, but it's following that story. And it's a beautiful book. It's a very interesting book in terms of that particular point in time, but also about the nature of consciousness and dreams. And folding that back into Turing's interest in AI and machine thought. There's a new book just coming out by someone called Matthew Cobb. It's called something like The Idea of the Brain. And he takes all the different metaphors and sort of way that people thought about brains across science and medicine. And it's very interesting. We've only relatively recently thought the brain had anything to do with thinking, for example. That came in pretty late. And his central argument, I think, is that we're probably still nowhere closer than we were 100 or 200 years ago, because we're still thinking in terms of metaphor and not necessarily engaging with the complexity of the structure in front of us. But it's a really interesting idea, and it gives you this historical perspective as well. Be careful, read the room. Just because you think something's funny doesn't guarantee everybody will think something's funny. And that's why, if something is, say, more extreme humour, I probably wouldn't start with that. I might keep stronger material back a bit until you're quite careful, quite certain of how people might react to it. If you are even remotely interested in science, I would say do it. I would certainly do your exams in the UK are A-levels, what we do at the age of 18. Do things like chemistry, physics, maths, if you possibly can. Biology, brilliant. I mean, obviously, only if you're interested in science, but don't even necessarily do more specific sciences then. If someone wants to do psychology, I say do psychology at university, don't do it at A-level. Keep your options open. And I think the thing about science is it opens a lot of doors. You can, if you do something like psychology, you will learn about psychology, but you'll also learn a bit about neuroscience, and you'll learn about statistics, and you'll learn something about computing, because that's what you need to do psychology. So you learn a lot of other things along in parallel with any sort of science study. And You may go into science, you may not, but you'll have that perspective and you'll have those tools. And it sounds stupid, but I still use my chemistry, physics and biology that I did when I was 18. I still use them most days in my job. So it does feel like you've kind of, it's a career that opens a lot of doors. You can use your knowledge in lots of different ways, and it can lead to many other really interesting opportunities. What we don't normally think of, but the human voice is the most flexible musical instrument that exists in nature. No other animal can make the sounds we make, and actually there are all these extraordinary pockets of expertise. So I've worked a lot with beatboxers and vocal impressionists and singers, or people like this guy in the army. And what you see is they are just taking the voice off to these places. We probably could all go, but when we speak, we don't have to. And in fact, we normally go to some lengths to avoid doing funny things with our voices. So when you take that constraint away, it's very interesting to explore actually where voices can go. My take-home message from tonight would be, I hope that I can make you think about laughter differently. When I started studying laughter, and I never set out to study laughter, I was studying emotion in the voice, and I thought laughter was, I called it amusement, and I thought it's what you do when you find something funny. And then the more and more I studied laughter, the more I realised that was wrong, and that lots of much more complex things are happening when we laugh. We do laugh when we find something funny, but it is one tiny facet of one of the more interesting and complex things we do. And I hope that by the end of it, you at the very least would like to know more about that. Assuming on the habitable planet they've got like a breathable air, I would want to take a musical instrument of some kind. I'd like to take a piano or a guitar.